versus there are some biological relationships, obviously, that are not great, that you have abusive parents and stuff like that. So adoption is one of the most beautiful things I think that we as human beings have decided to do. It's not like a approval or disapproval for me. It's more of a I just haven't spent the time to think about if that's the way that I would want to go if we ever got to the point where we want a second kid.
We stumped. Oh no.
No. I'm not stumped. I'm quite the opposite. I'm just trying to figure out how far I want to go. So
this is probably further than we've had as a conversation on the serious side of things about this ever.
Sam, can you tell me what growing up was like with your younger brother?
Sometimes I wish he wasn't there. Just because my parents divorced right after he was born. Mom bounced. It was really difficult. He was in and out of hospitals for his first 5 years, with surgeries and stuff like that. And then his mental health or mental disability on top of it. But I love him to death. I told my parents the first week that he was born that when they can't take care of him, that I will. And I've stuck to that. And I'm getting all teary-eyed because I love my brother so much. I've broken up relationships with people that couldn't handle him. Ben charged in head first with my brother and has agreed from day one of meeting him that he will one day be our responsibility. Obviously it's difficult when your siblings 10 years apart, but then on top of it, a parent is gone. You're going through your own change as a preteen, and then you have a baby to take care of too. Obviously that's rough.
So I'm just gonna go for it. So I'm gonna talk now, okay? I'm gonna use words like imagine. So here's what I'm thinking. If I put myself in your shoes, Sam, like you said, you love your brother a lot, and it can be kind of confusing because you can love him and you can also you can have thoughts that you wish he was never there, right? And you can see what he did. I mean, unclear whether I don't think he split up your parents, but it's an additional stress. So a lot of times what happens is when a special needs child enters a family, it just exposes the weaknesses that are already there, right? It's an additional pressure. It sounds like you really stepped up in an amazing way between the ages of 12 and 14. And I would guess that you don't regret that for a second. And it sucked. And so, I'm kind of hearing the same thing about pregnancy. Is that I'm sure you don't regret it, but it was awful and you would never want to do it again. Makes perfect sense, right? I mean, I'm not even having been pregnant, I can completely get behind you there. And at the same time, I wonder if as someone who does sort of have fears kind of hang out in the back of your mind, I mean, you have to, I guess I shouldn't say that, but I can't imagine a world in which you haven't had a thought about what you're signing your son up for if you do have a second biological child. What you're signing, whether you're essentially repeating history, and what are you signing Charlie up for? And what kind of pressure is it going to put on you guys? And whether that sort of holds you back.
I feel like Ben and I are stronger than what my parents were. My parents, from the age of about 6 until I was about 12, would be separated, back together. And, I feel like my brother was probably kind of that one last ditch effort, which obviously very rarely works to save a marriage. So yeah, they lived apart. My dad lived in the basement. They were back together and everything was fine. And then a year later, my mom would move out this time and so on and so forth. So definitely for sure, my brother was the breaking point of them realizing that it just isn't working.
Yeah. And do you ever think about what it would mean for Charlie if you guys? Oh, my camera just. Oh, there we go. Do you ever think about what it would mean for Charlie if you guys did have a special needs child?
Yeah, for sure. It would suck, especially because he's younger. I mean, at 10, I was able to kind of grasp the idea of what my future was going to be like. But let's say I get pregnant next month, and so he'll be 6 by the time a baby gets here, and you won't, especially with my brother's disability. We don't know if we didn't notice it earlier because we were more focused on the physical disability than the mental. But we didn't know about my brother's mental disability until he was about a year and a half old. Because he was already so delayed with his physical disability, we just kind of attributed everything to that until all of a sudden we realized that he's not talking. So yeah, I mean, of course, I worry that it would make Charlie's life harder. And it's obviously already hard as an only child to have a sibling come in sometimes at the beginning. And I just think that, not that my brother has like a bad life at all, but if there's other kids out there that are already here and already have a potentially, not so great life because they're in the adoption system or foster system, whatever, I feel like I could at least save them, maybe, kind of thing. So,
yeah, I'm sort of hearing like having a biological child comes with particular risks, and because Sam, I know it sounds kind of weird, but I know pregnancy is sort of very uncomfortable and stuff, but just hearing you, getting to know you a little bit, like I find it hard to believe that, and this may be me being an asshole, like I think you've demonstrated so much strength, so much resilience, that I just find myself, I don't know why, maybe this means I'm mean or something, but like I find myself being a little bit surprised that that's what would hold you back, like physical discomfort, like hold you back.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know you that well, but
I don't know. I mean, and especially if we have a girl. Like, if we have a girl, then we're golden, because women only pass this disorder on to their sons. Very rarely does it show up in a female.
Yeah.
But even then, like, as soon as we found out that we were having a boy, both Ben and I, our anxiety, like, we were excited, but our anxiety went up, and we were like, oh, okay, well, I mean, now what? Now do we need to start doing research? What kind of, and we did the extra tests and stuff like that beforehand to make sure things were good, but just the anxiety of going up to that appointment and finding out if we were having a boy or a girl for both of us, if I remember correctly, was very high. We were very excited, super stoked, talking about it the whole week up, but walking in there, that was kind of like our moment of, do we need to potentially change and learn a lot of stuff in this very moment, or are we going to be okay if we have a girl, kind of thing.
Mm. So it sounds like you guys were aware that there was a risk of this when you had your first kid.
Correct.
Yep.
And how did you guys manage that?
Lots of anxiety leading up. I think it was around 6 months with Charlie that it was very obvious that there was, nothing present. And even, I remember after Charlie was born, there was a couple times that Ben had pulled me aside and he was just like, do you recognize anything in Charlie that you remember from your brother? Just, randomly every few months or whatever, leading up until we realized that, we're good to go. So a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
that makes a lot of sense. And Ben, have I stepped out of line yet?
Nah, I'll yell at you if you do. Don't worry.
Yeah, I'm seriously, I'm not kidding. I'm
No.
relying on you to do that. Okay.
This is stuff that she's openly talked about with other people and that we've talked about. Like, so with her brother, one of the things that early in our relationship that I wanted to establish, and like we wrote our own vows for our wedding, and I included in there that her brother. I'm trying to avoid saying names just in case.
Right.
Sure.
But I made sure that she knew that I was going to be supportive for her brother and provide if it came time to provide somewhere for him to live, I was there ready to go. But like I've done a bunch of charity stuff with my channel, and the first 2 charity streams we ever did were for the National Fragile X Foundation, which is similar. Fragile X is what her brother has or something similar to it. It was such an important thing for me to make sure that she understood, because obviously it was like such a main piece of her life growing up. It was a focus around potentially why her parents split up, and it was one of the most difficult times of her life, having to raise her brother, and like that's important to her, and she's important to me. So I wanted to make sure that she knew that I was on board no matter what ended up happening, whether we had to, take her brother on as part of our life, eventually, whether it was earlier or later, that I was there ready to go.
Wow. And what you're saying, Sam, makes a ton of sense. So can I just share what I kind of heard from you?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to inject a little bit of my own, I'm going to fill in some of the gaps in my mind. So let me know if those are like, could be completely off. So like, I can't imagine. I mean, you guys didn't really know, right? Like y'all rolled the dice once.
Yep.
And you guys hit the jackpot with Charlie, like in every way, shape,
Very much.
And I can imagine that, like, rolling the dice once was bad enough. And if you guys like win, right? Like if I bought GME at 50 cents and it rose to 300 and I decided to sell, and I and then GME like bobs down again, like I don't even know if I want to get back on that roller coaster. I won once. It's clearly enough for me to retire on, right? Like, it sounds like y'all are happy and you guys have an amazing son. And there's a part that's like, why even bother? And then there's also like this sort of like 2 birds with 1 stone thing, right? Because there are kids out there who don't have such a good life. And, if you guys decide that you guys have the bandwidth for another kid, you can sort of like give a child who doesn't have a promising life, like what sounds to me to be, unless you guys are really just super sociopathic and I missed something completely, a loving home, right? With like 2 parents who like really care about their child a lot, their children a lot, 2 parents who communicate a lot, 2 parents who strive really hard to be good parents. And there's already a kid out there who doesn't have that. So, why go back, why go back to the gambling table when, there's a kid out there who may need your love and already exists. How is that for a summary?
I would say
you can hear the vacuum cleaner, our cleaning company's just finishing up. I mean, for me, that's 100%. Like, especially with there's been a few times in taking photos and stuff like that I've had to call CPS because a kid isn't smiling and their dad takes him into the bathroom and you can hear him hitting the child. Like, sorry, that flashback. I'm having to call the cops on them and making a huge scene, but got the kid out of there. There's kids that are already hurting. I want to be able to help them. The end. But I'm also totally fine being 3 Musketeers, too.
he is a handful sometimes. Let's not pretend that he is. I think every kid, because he's a little clone of me.
Let's remember that the 3 Musketeers had D'Artagnan, right?
Right, but nobody really remembers.
Yeah, true.
If there's ever an analogy that says that you guys should adopt, it's the 3 Musketeers. That reference is basically like, there's the 3 of us, and then there's a rando from the outside that we're bringing in. It's like that. Younger, different, And it's also interesting because what I'm hearing from, if you really think about it, like, Ben it seems like a lot of Ben's inspiration to have a child actually came from a child that wasn't his own, right? Like, I remember still just for myself, like, being really uninterested in children. Like, when I was doing pediatrics and stuff in OB-GYN, like those were probably my two least favorite rotations in medical school. And like with kids, I just didn't, I didn't really get them. Like I was good with kids, but I just had no, I didn't think they were particularly cute. I thought they were, and then like once I had a kid, it's like some switch flipped in my brain.
Right.
And I know personally, at least, like, my wife and I routinely talk about, like, when we'll see like we visited a friend yesterday and they have a young kid and just holding, like, you guys know the denseness of a baby?
Yeah.
How like, they stay the same weight, but they just stretch out. And so like feeling that denseness, it's one of the things that I really like. It's just a physical sensation that's associated with a lot of good emotion for me, just like holding like a baby. And then we'll do it sometimes, and then like we had this brief not even a conversation, it was like one exchange. It was like, do you want to have another one? And I was like, nope, I'm good. And then she's like, yep, me too. I think going through it twice, I mean, there are times where we lose our minds a little bit and we think about it, but I think we're set.
I think every parent, there's certain nights where you crash into bed at the end of the night and you look at each other and you're like, why the hell did we decide to do this in the first place?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so it sounds like it feels to me like this is tied up a little bit. I don't, how do y'all feel about that?
I think that's true. I mean, this is one of those things that we've talked about at least semi-regularly over the last multiple years of being together, of like, what direction are we going to go if we ever go one way or another? And especially with how busy we are right now, because I never do, you can't imagine that this is going to be your job. Like I especially because at the beginning I got into streaming as like a side thing, right? It was never really intended to be my full-time gig, and then suddenly here we are. I think it's something that we've had a pin in, just kind of sitting aside for a while, and it doesn't really surprise me if this is the way it continues to go for a while too. Plus,
we don't tend to jump into anything. Like,
oh yeah,
we tend to be pretty practical when it comes to doing most things in our life.
I'm not impulsive. I sit in my basement and play video games all day. This is not, it's not like, hey, let's just have a kid today for fun. That's not the kind of decision making you're gonna find here.
Yeah, you don't just randomly change your raid schedule just for any random, any random
exactly.
trick you're dating.
Thank you.
You have to align to 39 other people and shift them 2 hours into the future.
Now, before anybody goes after that one, this was like I need to change what I'm doing just so everybody knows, and then people jumped on board with that. It wasn't like you change or go F yourself kind of thing. So sure. I try not to pressure people to do stuff they don't want to do.
I'm sure that interacting with the WoW guild quite so intensely probably helped you in your marriage, to be honest, because I find that there's a lot of communication that has to happen in a successful WoW guild.
I think it got me ready to be a father too, because the amount of parenting you feel like you have to do sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
The amount of yelling that would come out of that room when you were raiding sometimes, especially when you became raid leader, because you didn't start out as a raid leader. You eventually came into being like the full guild leader and stuff like that too. Like the amount of yelling, all the memes that came out of that.
There was a lot of parenting practice. Yeah.
He's adopted many an orphan over the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing that I do want to say, Sam, just this isn't something we have to get into now, but or I would actually recommend against it. But something that I just sort of like want to mention to you is I've worked with a lot of people with chronic Lyme. And, we're not entirely sure what chronic Lyme is. Do you guys want to explain just for the audience, like if you feel comfortable? I mean, you guys have already mentioned it, but can you explain to people like what your understanding of what chronic Lyme is?
As far as like how it feels and stuff, or
just what is it?
Basically, a tick bites you, and then you never remember scientific words. But basically, you become sick with the what's inside the tick. You can usually treat it right away with antibiotics, and most people are good to go. But if it's caught later, it kind of spreads and hides throughout your body, and you can either like just blast yourself with antibiotics nonstop and trying to see if you can catch it all, or you, with the doctor that I go with, we are just now kind of treating the symptoms. Symptoms are different for everybody, which makes it very difficult to diagnose. It's also just very difficult to diagnose in the first place for the type of illness that it is. And who knows, maybe maybe my doctor diagnosed me incorrectly too. But for me, it's a lot of joint and muscle pain, and a lot of fatigue. Before I got on my medication, which kind of helps me a little bit, but I was taking anywhere between 3 to 5 naps a day, going between 30 minutes to 2 hours, in the thick of it. And now I usually need to take 1 30 to 40-minute nap a day. If I don't get it, then I just become really cranky. Um, but if I try to think back to what tired was to me, because my first doctor just told me I was tired because I had a kid. And if I think back to like the tiredness that I feel right now, and it's been 4 hours since I took my medicine this morning, I could go to sleep and sleep for a whole night's worth of rest right now.
Wow.
And be 100% okay with that. But I can't. Like, I can't, sleep all day long. So I just push through it.
The one thing I would say, Sam, so it's kind of weird, but I'd say probably like historically 5% of people in my practice have had chronic Lyme. And I do a lot of work that's sort of like in complementary and alternative medicine. And what I've actually found is that there's some weird immune stuff. I don't really know what's going on with chronic Lyme, and they'll have their Lyme doctors. But I have seen a lot of like clinical improvement through some like things like psychotherapy. Now, a lot of people will think that if psychotherapy helps chronic Lyme, does that mean that it's all in your head? I really don't think so. Because like you're saying, there are physical symptoms that are not really psychological, right? It's like very clearly something physical is going on. But we do know, for example, that meditation improves like immune markers and things like rheumatoid arthritis, in lupus, other autoimmune or like chronic like immune or infectious states. And so I don't know exactly how this works, but just having, talked to you for a little bit, there's actually a lot of emotion like right under the surface that I think you carry with you. You kind of mentioned that, fears, they don't rent in your mind, they buy and they pay mortgages. And so interestingly enough, like I've seen some benefit from that. And I was just going to say it may be something that you want to, like, you could think about just in terms of like, if I tend to think about the body as like a body and mind as a unit, right? And if you're holding on, if your mind is trying to process or holding on to like negative emotion, it just doesn't quite have the RAM to deal with, the physical stuff. Like you can't do both. If you think about, stress and pregnancy, like you just can't, you can be stressed out or you can be pregnant. You can't be both because that's like all your body and your mind can handle.
Yeah.
Just something to think about that, I've seen a lot of people find some benefit. Doesn't mean that it's psychological in origin. I really don't think it is. But, just letting go, because I can imagine you also feel like guilty for having some of those thoughts that you had about your brother in the past because you do love him so much. And like, I found that, there are you can let those, you can evict those fears if you try, if you're lucky and if you give it a shot. So just something to think about. I hope that wasn't out of line.
No, definitely. And I definitely felt like a lot of relief. I've done yoga on and off and meditation on and off throughout my life, but in the past 4 years, I've definitely like really dug into it. And sometimes like that's all I need is just like 10-15 minutes to just go. If I get overwhelmed because I'm so tired of things, I just need to step away and zen for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. So I noticed that we were supposed to talk about parenting today, and I don't think we quite got there. How do y'all feel about that?
If this is the way you want it to go, then that's fine with me. I think this is an opportunity for you to ask away if there's anything related to what we do and with Charlie and all that. I mean, now's the time, right?
Sure. I mean, how do y'all feel? I mean, this is what
I've always been open to talking about feelings. Like I never found it useful to, hide feelings or anything like that. So talking about all of that with pregnancy and everything and babies and cool. Like I think it's definitely something afterwards that Ben and I will sit down and kind of probably go over like the notes version of
Sure.
everything together. So
Ben, do you want to talk about Charlie?
I can talk about Charlie all day.
I know. Charlie's cool.
Yeah, so let's just. I'm a little bit curious. Maybe we can just kind of get like a short version, but like, so if you don't mind me, don't share any information that isn't, but like ballpark of how old he is.
He's 5.5.
He's 5.5.
Okay. And so what's it like, being a streamer, running a streaming business, and having a kid?
He is the smartest little human being I think I've ever met, and that ends up being really, really good. He's reading at like first, second grade level already. He's working on math stuff. He can articulate himself really well. He speaks clearly. The other side of that though is like he is wildly inquisitive about everything. So sometimes, I'm in my studio right now, and Sam will bring me coffee or lunch or whatever, because I obviously with streaming you have to be engaged with your chat the entire time or doing something. They don't like you just sitting there doing nothing. And so he'll come down with her, but it's like a 10-minute process of him going through every little shiny, because I got a lot of toys in this room. It's like I don't blame him at all. It's like a shiny lights friggin' playground of all sorts of stuff to look at and mess with that he's never messed with before, because it sits down here. But that spreads to so many other aspects of our conversation, our engagement with him is like nonstop questioning of everything. And I know that's part of like being 5 and trying to get a handle of the social back and forth. Like at that age, obviously he doesn't know all the social cues. He doesn't know when is appropriate or not appropriate to talk. He doesn't know about, like, we're working on raising our hand right now to get a question in, or like, hey mommy, hey daddy, I have something to say. But he's almost like smart to a point of frustration for me, because he's a lot like me in that it's like I want to absorb all the knowledge that I possibly can, even for him, that if it's like to a point of inconvenience for someone else. He's like, now's the time to answer this question, mommy or daddy. Let's talk about whatever this thing is that I want to know about.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about his intelligence as a double-edged sword almost.
Oh yeah, I mean almost. I know that I shouldn't look at it like that, because I would.
No, you absolutely should.
You think so?
Absolutely. So I had a supervisor who blew my mind one day. So like I think we see this a lot in the gaming community. She once told me something that she said that a gifted child is actually a special needs child. Because if you really think about it, they actually have needs that the average child may not have. Right? And when we think about special needs, we tend to think about it sort of like in a negative capacity in terms of like inability to do things. But I mean, I've seen this time and time and time again with like, I was sort of this way where like I was smart, growing up, and I was kind of like a little bit precocious, and like I struggled a lot kind of because of that. And we see this a lot with sort of like these burnt out, like gifted kids, right? Like you're gifted, and that comes with a whole pile of stuff like expectations, capabilities, frustration. Some of the worst situations that I've ever seen are when you have a kid who's like very gifted and has a high IQ, but also has something like bad ADHD or bad anxiety. And then they can feel like really, really stupid, right? They can feel a lot of shame and stuff like that. So I think that, it's kind of interesting, because I would absolutely, view almost everything about your kid as a double-edged sword. And that any capability can be like healthy in one circumstance and also like creates its own challenges and needs in another. But I'm sure you guys know that.
Yeah. And it first came like really stuck in my head that he is, everybody says that their kid is the cutest and the smartest and stuff like that. So this is mom bragging right now. That it first hit when we were going to the library and he started asking about chapter books at 5 years old. And now he doesn't read, like the regular small print chapter books, but he has the early reader books of like 8 chapters or so, and he reads it all in the night, and he's just like, all right, where's the next one? And I was like, okay, like I liked reading when I was a kid, but not like this. Yeah. He just wants to absorb all the knowledge. We watch so many YouTube videos about how to fix flat tires because he wants to just know how to fix flat. He's obsessed with flat tires, so he wants to know just in case somebody gets a flat tire. He wants to be the one to be able to help people fix the flat tire. He wants to be a
What's that
scientist.
that
when
YouTube
he's
guy
older.
that he was watching?
What was that?
What's the YouTube channel that he was watching? Chris Fix. Chris Fix. This dude does like POV of like fixing car parts and stuff like that. And it's like he could watch it for an entire day and know all about this stuff in the inside of a car. I'm like, he's gonna know more about cars than I do. In like you give him a week, he'll have it down pat.
Yeah,
It's
no,
wild.
I mean, I'm kind of wondering whether he was like watching when he saw his dad come to his mom's rescue when her car wasn't working, and when he knows
He can-
the
This
path
is
of the
how.
Chad
Yep.
begins with fixing a
I
flat
mean,
tire.
he just has such lofty goals for being a kid. He wants to be an engineer and a scientist. We just learned about what a roboticist is. So now he wants to be a roboticist, and he wants to make robots that the robot he wants to make for St. Jude, because we do a lot of work for St. Jude, so he's very aware of what goes on there. Is he wants to make a robot that if a kid doesn't want to go to their appointment, the robot will go pick up the kid and bring him to their appointment.
It's great.
Whatever.
My older kid is somewhere between wanting to be a princess, an artist, and a doctor. The younger kid is trying to decide what kind of demon she wants to be.
I want to be her when I grow up.
Because like when they're playing pretend, like one of them is like, "I'm a princess" or a queen, and the other one's like, "I'm a monster." It's interesting. They're very different. Yeah. So and any kind of like it sounds like Charlie's an amazing kid. It sounds like you guys are kind of treating him. You're not using a standard playbook. I think you guys are kind of writing the playbook as you go. I'm really hearing that from y'all. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so.
And anything, anything that you would say to, streamers or people kind of thinking about having kids in terms of like how to make it work well, right? Because like most streamers, I mean, like I know, Ben and I, and we're not going to comment on Sam's age because I'm sure she's very young because she's
I'm older
quite.
than Ben. So.
That's ridiculous. I don't believe it.
Good man. Good man.
So I've walked the tightrope as well, my friend. But I think streamers, are getting older. I think we work with a fair number of streamers that are, concerned about like how to find like a healthy relationship and are thinking about having kids and stuff like that. I mean, what would you say to people who are sort of like on the fence or trying to figure out how to do it?
I think that everybody's journey is going to end up being different. It's going to be a personal thing that leads them one way or another. In fact, if anything, there's a strong parallel between being a parent and being a streamer, and that people give advice and write all sorts of books about how to do it and how to make it and how to raise your kid and all that. But there are so many different one-off scenarios, instances of every single person, every kid, every stream being different. That like you can gather so much information and it's still not going to give you the right answer. And so being able to like roll with the punches is probably the most important thing for me. That's that looking back at it now, it's like as Charlie has developed as a kid and as my career has grown and changed over time, it's like what works one day might not work the next day, and you just got to be okay with that and figure out what the next thing is going to be to continue to grow in the right way.
Well said. Sam, anything you want to add to that?
I would definitely say that there's never a good time to have a kid. Like, everyone's just like, we're going to wait until we have this and we do this and we do that and yada, yada, yada. You're never going to find an opportunity where you're like, everything's lined up perfectly. Let's have a child now kind of thing. And that, and also kind of adding on to Ben, is that you need to be okay with things constantly changing. And especially with like parents that want to stream and they start out kind of just like part-time, but they love it and they want to do it so much that they want to go full-time, that they don't really kind of think too much of the back end. Like they think that they're going to make enough money and then they end up struggling, and it ends up, harming their family because they can't pay their bills or whatever. And then the parents' mental health is low. So then they start getting more frustrated, and then they take it out on their kids without really realizing it and stuff. And I think, especially with being a parent first and then going into streaming, you really need to not put your dreams aside. Not saying that, because you can do all the things you want to as a parent and stuff too. But definitely keeping the whole family in mind.
You gotta have a plan. Yeah.
Yeah, when you have a backup plan. We had a backup plan. I mean, when Ben started, he jumped from working in his corporate job to working in streaming only. We had a backup plan that if he went below a certain number within the first 6 months, he was going to get a part-time job somewhere to supplement it. When I jumped from my corporate studio job to starting my own business, we made an agreement that I would have a 3-year part-time job just to make sure that I could supplement with everything. And the day I hit 3 years at that part-time job, I bounced. And thankfully for Ben, it only went up from there for him. But we made a plan and we put a timeline on it. And it's not just if we can't afford food, then I'll do this. It's like if you're going to do this, have steps of where you feel like you can be and what is plausible and feasible for your family.
Yeah, beautifully put. I mean, I think I'm really hearing you guys sort of say, like, planning for eventualities and planning contingencies. Like, it's fine to chase your dreams, but do so in a practical manner. I think too often we kind of think about, we do a lot of work with parents and kids, but these are kids that, maybe have a video game addiction, or I think really the primary problem is communication. And the kid will come to the parent, will say like, oh, I want to go pro. And then like they feel like their parent is not supportive. And sometimes they're not supportive, but I think there's just a very practical, you got to plan for it. I know we were the same way. So when I was starting Healthy Gamer, I sort of scaled back on my day job, but I would literally work like nights and weekends to like support the family. And that's just sort of like what we had to do because we had to make ends meet.
Yep.
And so you kind of got to do what you got to do. If it's working part-time on the side for 3 years and then bouncing, and then like I still remember like, quitting from my nights and weekends job because that was like time away from my family. That was a high price to pay, but we felt like it was the right thing to do. And it feels good.
For us is we always remember that everything is a season. Like when Ben was working basically full-time at his corporate job and full-time streaming on nights and weekends, we knew that in order for it to be possible, that's just what it needed to be. And it wasn't going to be forever because we were both going to put our heads down and work our asses off to make it work. And then it got to a point where, he was able to just do one thing, and then he had more time again. So
awesome. Yeah, I thank you guys so much for kind of sharing some of your perspectives, some of your experience. I know I've asked you for permission 1,000 times whether I pushed too hard. I'm glad you guys, feel like I didn't overstep. I think it was, I think it's an important conversation to have. It's really fascinating to hear how you guys have gotten to where you are. It sounds like y'all are just, maybe not just getting started, but in the mid-game. Because y'all have been together now for 14 years.
That's still just getting started.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
No.
Please say we're at least halfway through the movie, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's squarely in the mid game. Like most people that we interview on stream are like in the early game. You guys sound like you're in the mid game. Where it's like y'all are high level now. You've got some decent items. You're level 45 or maybe like a 55 approaching end game content, and that's where you guys are. You're not like hanging around in Azeroth. It's
hey, don't trash talk Azeroth, man. I got a lot of good memories there. Okay.
Benjamin, I'm only just thinking of Gloomhaven now that he's saying that.
Yeah, if you're looking for a punishing tabletop game, that's a good one.
Do you guys like board games?
Love them.
Yeah.
Does Charlie like board games?
Yes.
Yep.
We have 2 shelves of kids/family board games and 2 shelves of adult board games.
Any recommendations for 5-year-olds?
Oh gosh. Is Red Light Green Light.
Red Light Green Light's a great one.
So good. It's so fun. And
what's the squirrel one?
Sneaky Snacky Squirrel is that one. Trying to think. Charlie loves the Ticket to Ride Juniors. We liked Monopoly Junior. Was a good one as well. He loves any of the card games like Old Maid and Crazy Eights. Man, that kid is good at Crazy Eights. He beats me all the time. He wins routinely, yeah. I refuse to play Connect 4 with him because he beats me all the time.
Last kind of random question. How do y'all feel about arranged marriage contracts?
Hello?
I'm kidding.
I was like, where is this coming from? Because I'm okay with introducing my son to somebody and letting them decide.
We could have a conversation. I'll get my lawyer involved. That's fine.
Fantastic. No, it sounds like he's a wonderful kid. I think there's I started playing one game that my 5.5-year-old really likes, which is Loot. You guys heard of this?
Mm-mm.
I don't think I have, no.
So it's I think Charlie will be fine for it. So I think it's actually for like 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds or whatever. But if he's playing Connect 4 and stuff, it's a cool game, and